Hey, hey, everybody, let's have some fun. You only live but once, but when you're dead, you're done. So let the good times roll. Let the good times roll. Don't care whether you're young or old.
So welcome guys. It's the moment that all Mafia fans have been waiting for. I can finally say that a new Mafia game is in the works. But what's most surprising to everyone is that the game is set to be a prequel instead of a direct sequel to Mafia 3. This is according to the heavily reliable Kotaku, who said that the Mafia game is in very early development. Now, honestly, I can't lie, I am a bit disappointed that we won't be able to get the Las Vegas setting that was so heavily rumoured in the past. But with the game going in a prequel direction, it will allow us to see the origins of the world that was created in the Mafia trilogy. Now today's video will be focusing on a Salieri based prequel. This seems like a possible direction that Hangar 13 would go in because of the time period. Having the game set before the Mafia remake will allow us to see a younger Salieri. 1920s is the peak of the Prohibition era, so we could see the game based around this time. This is a period when it was thought that there would never be another world war. The First World War was over in 1918, and there was again room for positivity and a bright future in the 1920s. It would be a very interesting time to play in a Mafia game. The TV show Boardwalk Empire perfectly showed off how cool this era was. We did see some of the era towards the end of the Mafia remake, which was set around the 1930s, but they could truly expand on it in a Mafia prequel game. As the Mafia remake was past the peak of the Prohibition era, with the game being set in the 1930s. Now the Prohibition era is when the Mafia started making an insane amount of cash. With the US banning alcohol in 1920, people turned to illegal ways to buy alcohol. This time also brought about some iconic real-life Mafia figures who could feature in a Salieri prequel story and interact with them. The likes of Lucky Luciano. By the mid-1920s, legendary mob figure Lucky Luciano was a multi-millionaire. New York's top bootlegger, making and importing alcohol. Another big figure around this time was Al Capone, who was also called Scarface. He was a major gangster during the Prohibition era in Chicago. Now we could have a Salieri prequel based in a number of places. We've already seen the fictional versions of some big cities explored before, like Chicago, New York, New Orleans. So they could even have a Salieri prequel game based around Chicago and New York. Or they could even bring in a new city. From what we know of Salieri during the 1920s is that he was a cop originating to Don Peppone in Lost Haven. But I don't think many people would be that excited to just have Lost Haven feature in a new Mafia game. So they could also create a fictional city based off Atlantic City, New Jersey. Atlantic City, New Jersey is where a lot of Prohibition activity took place, and even where the show Boardwalk Empire is based off. They could even have the story set in Sicily. The game could be based around Salieri's childhood and the years following that. We could see the start of Salieri's journey in Sicily, which is an island close to Italy, and then it could expand to America later on. Sicily is where the Italian Mafia was originally born in, so we could have Hangar 13 dive deep into the history and origins of the Mafia in a way we've never seen before. Storyline wise, it also makes sense for Salieri, because Salieri arrived in the United States in 1908 when he was possibly around 31 years old, so there's still a lot more we could see from prior to this. With the game being set around the 1890s, it could show us how Salieri first got into the criminal lifestyle in his younger days. Now during Salieri's younger years, he was best friends with someone we are very familiar with. That someone is Frank Coletti. Frank Coletti is second Salieri to Salieri in the Mafia remake, which takes place in 1930, but he also shared a close relationship with Salieri prior to this. When Frank was a child, he once owned a dog which was a racer in big money races. Later he met Salieri and the two set up races with Frank's dog. Eventually the dog became pregnant and lost the race. Now this angered Salieri and he tried to drown the dog as punishment. Now Frank Coletti was strongly against this and he got into a fight with Salieri. Eventually he ended up breaking Salieri's nose. But even after this fight and Frank breaking Salieri's nose, Salieri still ended up shooting the dog as punishment. So seeing the fallout from that fight and how everything proceeded to go would have been really interesting to see. And getting a more deeper look into how Salieri and Frank made their way from Sicily to America is something I would love to see. Just imagine some of the dialogue between Salieri and Frank when they'd be making their journey from Sicily to America. The interactions and dialogue would be so good. Now showing the journey of Frank and Salieri from Sicily to America is where things could get interesting. They could have aeroplanes play a larger part in the game. So we could see Frank and Salieri travel from the airplane to America. And they could even allow us to explore an airport. Maybe we could even interact on the airplane with other passengers. So like instead of bringing in horses, they could have airplanes play a bigger factor in the game. But even then, airplanes just came into existence in 1903. So before that, they could just try and avoid any extra travelling parts in the game. Now another way they could carry on the story after Frank and Salieri make their way to America is by showing us how Salieri became such a key member of the Peppone crime family. Now it is believed that Salieri arrived in the United States in 1908, so that is when these events would be taking place. But this was like 10 years after he arrived in the United States, so possibly around 1918. So once Salieri arrives in America, the timeline would be from like 1908 till mid 1920ish. Now from 1920 to like 1929, it was the peak of the Prohibition era. So like I mentioned before, we could see a lot of Prohibition activities take place. Now storyline wise, the 1920s is when Salieri really started to make a name for himself in the Mafia world. During this time he was a copper regime to Don Peppone. Don Peppone was the boss of the Peppone crime family. Under his watch the Italian gangster grew and flourished. He corrupted police and politicians alike. He was once the most powerful man in Lost Haven. Salieri and Don Peppone worked alongside Morello. Morello was also a copper regime to Don Peppone. Now initially both Salieri and Morello respected and valued each other in their younger days. They considered each other as good friends. This is why in the Mafia remake you see Salieri shared mixed emotions after Morello's death. Even after all the wars and chaos, Salieri did once share a special bond with Morello. Now it is stated by Detective Norman that the photo I'm showing you guys is from April 1920. It features Don Peppone in the middle with a young Morello to his left and a young Salieri to his right. Now both Salieri and Morello were once both integral members of the Peppone crime family. When this picture was taken, Salieri would have been around 31 years old. Now 1 or 2 years after this picture was taken is where things really start to take a turn. Now this is because a really big twist happened in the saga of the Peppone crime family. So what had happened was that Don Peppone ended up dying. Now in the Mafia remake there was a lot of conspiracy around Don Peppone's death. It is said on Don Peppone's cigarette card that Peppone died in a botched deal in 1921. However, Detective Norman stated in the Mafia remake that Peppone died by drowning in a lake in 1920. Now we're not sure who drowned Peppone, but it could have been Morello and Salieri. It could have been a rival gang boss, it could have been anyone, but it seems more like it was Morello and Salieri who got this done. As Morello even added to this conspiracy in the Mafia remake by saying that Salieri and him have been at war ever since they killed Don Peppone. Now he could have meant that in another way, but it obviously heavily implies that it was Salieri and Morello who killed Peppone. So diving deep into how Morello and Salieri ended up killing Peppone is something really intriguing. Now after Peppone's death, Salieri and Morello blamed each other for the Don's death, and they decided to divide up Lost Haven into 2 territories and form their own crime families. So now as you can see, there's just a lot of content that could be based around the Salieri prequel based game. So I can see why they're going into the prequel direction.